In November 2023, Italian police cordoned off an elementary school in the really quiet historical town of San Genesio.
Yeah.
And they didn't put up police tape because of, like, an outside threat or a natural disaster or anything.
Right.
They seized the entire building and displaced 200 young children because the very men contracted to renovate that school were caught on a wiretap. And they were actually joking about the building's structural integrity.
It's awful.
Yeah, one of them literally said, "Children don't weigh much, so, if the roof collapses, it's fine." Today, we are tracing the audio cable of that specific wiretap, and we are going to follow it all the way down into the dark.
I mean, that quote, it just completely shatters the illusion of the whole Loma Linda region.
Yeah.
Because if you picture the area around Pavia, you mentioned these really tranquil, mirror-like rice paddies.
Right, very picturesque.
Exactly. It projects this aura of absolute, almost boring bureaucratic stability. But that wiretap, which actually sparked public protests where parents marched with banners that said, we weigh little, just like your consciences.
Wow, that's powerful.
It was. And that was the loose thread. And when investigators started pulling it, what unraveled wasn't just like a local zoning dispute.
Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today, and your mission as you listen to this, is to map out this incredibly dense, multi-tiered labyrinth of alleged corruption. It's known as the Sistema Pavia, or the Pavia System.
Yeah, it was massive.
It really is. We're looking at 3 massive interconnected law enforcement investigations. You've got Clean 1, Clean 2, and Clean 3, and we're going to examine the actual mechanics of how local municipal funds were allegedly drained, how the police themselves supposedly became, like, the enforcers for this corruption,
Right.
and how this entire machine might actually intersect with the ghost of Chiara Poggi, who was the victim in one of Italy's most heavily publicized unsolved murders from back in 2007.
But before we go any further, I want to establish a very clear ground rule for you, the listener.
Good idea.
Yeah, because the investigative documents we are analyzing today, they name several real-world political figures.
Mm-hmm.
And they span the entire Italian political spectrum, mentioning representatives from parties like Fratelli d'Italia to the Lega.
Right.
So we are impartially reporting the contents of these investigations, strictly to convey the facts, the allegations, and the timelines exactly as they were officially documented.
Right. Neither of us takes any political side here.
Exactly. We do not endorse any of the political viewpoints or associations mentioned. We are just here to look at the anatomy of the alleged system itself.
Absolutely. And, I mean, to understand the anatomy of a monster, you have to start with the smallest cells, right? So I want to look at the genesis of this whole thing, the investigation that they dubbed Clean 1.
Right. Where it all started.
Yeah, because I was genuinely surprised by how, like, mundane the starting point was. We aren't starting with a mafia boss or, a dead body in a trunk.
Yeah.
We're starting with ASM Pavia. So explain to me what this entity actually is, because the way public utilities operate in Italy seems kind of central to how this alleged theft happened.
Yeah, so ASM Pavia is a municipal utility company.
Mm-hmm.
Like if your garbage gets picked up, or if your street lights turn on, or if local environmental services function at all, ASM is the entity managing it.
Okay.
They handle massive, massive amounts of public money, essentially taxpayer euros. But they operate in this weird, this gray zone. They're publicly owned, but structurally they run like private corporations.
Oh, I see.
Which means they often fly completely under the radar of daily public scrutiny. You don't pay attention to them until, the garbage stops being collected.
Which makes it literally the perfect place to hide if you want to siphon money. So in late 2023, investigators drop the hammer on ASM Pavia's top brass. They arrest the president, Manuel Elaburo, and the director general, Giuseppe Trico.
Right.
And the charge is peculato. Now, I know that roughly translates to, like, embezzlement by a public official, but I want to understand the actual how.
Yeah, the mechanic.
Exactly. The investigation files allege that Chirico gave himself an irregular, unauthorized salary bump of about 15,000 euros a year. And I'm struggling to understand how that works. He's the director general, sure, but he still has a board, right?
Right, he does.
How do you just digitally transfer an extra 15K into your own checking account without, like, setting off every alarm in the accounting department?
Well, you don't do it with a direct transfer. You do it through the bureaucracy of what they call delegations.
Delegation.
Yeah. In these corporate bureaucratic structures, executives can take on specialized portfolios or operational mandates. So, say, becoming the direct head of human resources or the head of the environment sector.
Okay.
Usually those roles should be filled by separate qualified managers.
Right. Wait, so he essentially fired or just like didn't hire the HR manager and said, hey, I'll just do it myself?
Precisely. He allegedly assumed these extra delegations himself. And on paper, the justification is, well, I am absorbing the workload of two other managers, therefore I am entitled to the supplementary stipends associated with those roles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the prosecution alleges this was a completely fabricated operational need. He wasn't doing extra work to save the company money. He was gerrymandering the internal corporate structure specifically to create a legal-looking paper trail.
To drain the public resources into his private salary.
Exactly. It's using the rule book to steal.
That's so insidious because an outside auditor looking at the spreadsheet just sees, like, HR manager stipend paid to G. Chirico. It looks totally legitimate until you realize it's a phantom role.
Right. Exactly.
And this strategy of creating, phantom deliverables brings us to the politician involved, Elisabetta Fedigari. She was an ASM board member and concurrently running for regional elections with Fratelli d'Italia.
Yes.
The investigator zeroed in on an invoice for 5,500 euros. Now, 5,500 euros in a massive municipal budget is practically a rounding error, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's the cost of, like, a few nice office chairs. Why did this specific tiny invoice trigger such a massive cascade?
Because it wasn't about the amount at all. It was about the architectural blueprint of campaign finance fraud.
Okay, how so?
The invoice was paid out of the municipal budget to a private company called Larum Swirl, and that was run by an entrepreneur named Rocco Raitano.
Right.
The line item on the invoice said it was for the realization of a corporate institutional video to, promote ASM Pavia.
But I'm guessing there is no high-budget video about the wonders of Pavia's waste management?
Right. The investigation alleges there was no institutional video at all. The prosecution believes this money was essentially a front.
Okay.
Think about it. If a politician needs a few thousand euros to print election flyers or rent event spaces or run social media ads, they can't just take a bag of cash from the utility company's safe.
No, that's like a 1920s mob movie.
Exactly. In the modern era, you need a vendor. You have the public utility pay a friendly vendor for a fictitious service. And that vendor then allegedly funnels the equivalent value back into the politician's campaign apparatus.
Okay, so it's literal money laundering for local politics. And seeing that mechanism operating so smoothly with a 5,000 euro invoice implies that the plumbing was already installed for much, much larger sums.
Absolutely.
Which brings us back to that horrifying wiretap in San Genesio. The Clean One investigation sort of bleeds out of the utility company and hits the mayor of San Genesio, Enrico Tessera, and an engineer, Gianluca Di Bartolo.
Right, the school renovation.
Right. They are looking at the elementary school renovation. How are they actually rigging this? Because European laws on public bidding are incredibly strict. You have to put out an open tender, don't you?
You do, yeah, but there are always thresholds and loopholes. The primary mechanism for bid rigging at the municipal level involves artificially fracturing a really large contract.
Fracturing it, like breaking it up.
Yeah. If a full school renovation costs, say, 2 million euros, European law dictates a highly scrutinized, open international bidding process. But if you creatively divide that project into 10 separate contracts—
Oh, I see.
one for the roof, one for the plumbing, one for the electrical, and you keep each individual contract under the mandatory public tender threshold.
Then the mayor or the municipal engineer can just use direct assignment. They can literally handpick the winner.
Exactly. They can invite a curated list of just 3 or 4 friendly companies to submit private bids, and they just cycle the wins among this little cartel.
Wow.
The investigation alleges that in San Genesio, the contracts were being steered to specific builders, bypassing the spirit, if not the letter, of the law. And when you operate in a cartel where the builder knows they got the job through corruption, well, the builder immediately has to recoup the cost of the bribes.
Right. And how do they recoup it?
Yeah.
By using substandard materials? By cutting corners on the structural engineering? Which is exactly why those men were on the phone joking that children don't weigh much. They knew the roof wasn't up to code because the money meant for the steel beams was lining someone's pocket.
Yes, and that is the true visceral cost of administrative corruption. It's not just, numbers on a spreadsheet. It's a compromised building physically hanging over the heads of 200 kids.
But I have to push back a little here. I mean, look at Clean One, right? A guy manipulates his HR stipend, A politician gets a fake campaign video, a local mayor carves up a school contract. It's sociopathic given the risk to the kids, but structurally, isn't this just the banality of local graft?
Right. It seems common.
Yeah, you can find a corrupt mayor or a greedy utility manager in almost any country on Earth. Why did this local dragnet suddenly escalate into a crisis that terrified the entire region?
What's fascinating here is it's about who was listening and who they accidentally heard talking back.
What do you mean?
When the investigators were sitting in a room listening to the wiretaps of these local politicians and builders trying to map out the fake video invoices, they started hearing voices they recognized.
Wait, recognized from where?
From their own offices. They intercepted conversations where highly classified official law enforcement secrets regarding pending raids were being openly discussed by the suspects.
So the targets of the investigation actually knew what the investigators were going to do before they did it.
Exactly. The targets were receiving real-time tactical updates, which meant there was a massive gaping leak inside the police force itself.
Oh, man.
And that realization births the Clean 2 investigation. It shifts the focus from the politicians stealing the money to the men with the badges actively protecting them.
Enter Antonio Scoppetta and Maurizio Pappalardo. These two Carabinieri officers get caught on the Clean 1 wiretaps, and their arrests in late 2024 completely changed the temperature of this story.
Completely.
I want to break down these two men because their roles seem totally different. Let's start with Antonio Scoppetta. I'm looking at his title in the files. Forestry Carabinieri. I'm sorry, but why is a guy whose job is theoretically to inspect timber and wildlife attached directly to the prosecutor's office in Pavia? And how is he operating like a mafia middleman?
It's a great question, and it requires understanding how Italian investigative units are actually staffed. The prosecutor's office utilizes something called the Polizia Giudiziaria, the judicial police.
Okay.
It's an interagency pool. They pull officers from the state police, the Carabinieri, the financial police, and yes, the forestry corps, to serve directly under the magistrates, to execute warrants and manage files. So Scotty wasn't out in the woods. He was working inside the central nervous system of the Justice Department. He had access to the registry of suspects and the scheduling of raids.
And he allegedly weaponized that access. The files say he was using physical pizzini. Now, for you listening who don't follow mafia history, pizzini are those tiny, easily swallowed or burned paper notes that Sicilian mob bosses like Bernardo Provenzano used to bypass digital surveillance.
Right.
So Scoppetta, an officer of the state, is out here using mob tactics.
And he used deeply coded language on the phones, too. Because he knew his colleagues possessed wiretap technology. So he would arrange meetings by saying things like, I'm going to pick up or deliver the recipes.
The recipes?
Yeah, the recipes were the pizzini, the bribes, or the leaked case files. He acted as the secure analog courier for a digital world.
Which brings us to Maurizio Pappalardo, the former commander of the investigative unit. If Scoppetta is the courier, Pappalardo sounds like the Don. He ends up under house arrest for corruption and stalking. And the psychological profile, the files paint of this guy during the 2020 COVID lockdowns is just staggering.
It reveals a profound God complex. I mean, in 2020, Italy experienced some of the most draconian and terrifying pandemic lockdowns in Europe. Citizens couldn't leave their municipalities. Police were finding people for walking their dogs too far from their front doors.
I remember it was intense.
But the wiretaps allegedly caught Pappalardo completely ignoring this reality. He was organizing lavish dinners at restaurants with his friends, using his rank and his uniform to guarantee their safe passage across checkpoints.
The quote that chills me is him boasting on the phone, Noi siamo potere, we are the power. He actually believed the laws he enforced were merely suggestions for the ruling class.
Absolutely.
So how did they monetize this power? Like, how does a protection racket run by the police actually function day to day?
Well, the files detail a specific transaction involving a local builder named Carlo Boiocchi. Scoppetta purchased a townhouse in San Genesio from this builder at an absolutely massive, market-defying discount. We are talking about shading hundreds of thousands of euros off the legitimate value of the real estate.
So a cop on a public salary suddenly gets a luxury villa for pennies. And the currency he used to pay the difference wasn't cash, it was immunity.
Correct. In exchange for the discounted house, Scoppetta, allegedly alongside a third officer named Brigadier Daniele Ziri from the Labor Inspectorate, provided a cordon sanitaire.
What does that mean in this context?
This is a crucial mechanism.
Yeah.
If you are a construction firm, especially a corrupt one cutting corners, your absolute worst nightmare is the Labor Inspectorate. They can show up unannounced, find undocumented workers or missing safety harnesses, levy fines that can bankrupt a company overnight, or physically padlock the site.
Right. So Ziri and Scoppetta essentially draw an invisible magic circle around Boyocchi's construction sites. They guarantee that the state will never look at his scaffolding.
Yes.
It's an extortion racket, but instead of breaking your legs, they threaten you with the legal apparatus of the state. If you pay the bribe or sell the cheap house, the state leaves you alone.
But the abuse of the state apparatus wasn't just economic. This is where the story takes a deeply personal, really terrifying turn. Pappalardo, the former commander, is accused of running a multi-year, unauthorized espionage and stalking campaign against his ex-girlfriend.
This is the part that genuinely kept me awake. They weren't just following her around. The files allege Pappalardo used Scoppetta and other military resources to execute this.
Yeah.
I need you to explain the mechanics of this, because how do police stalk someone differently than a regular civilian?
A civilian stalker might follow your car or look at your public social media. But a police commander has access to the FDI. That's the central interforce database of the Italian police.
Okay.
It holds your entire life. Your traffic stops, your financial flags, your hotel registrations, your border crossings. Pappalardo allegedly used this vast, omniscient digital architecture to track her every move.
But wait, doesn't the SDI leave a digital footprint? I mean, if a commander runs the name of his ex-girlfriend 50 times a month, doesn't Internal Affairs get a red flag?
They absolutely should. The system logs every login and every query. But a commander bypasses this by either forcing subordinates to run the queries under their logins, framing it as a confidential informant check, or masking the inquiry within a larger, legitimate data dump.
Wow, that's so calculated.
Furthermore, they took this surveillance and turned it into kinetic psychological warfare. They allegedly sent anonymous, highly detailed threat letters to her workplace, actively attempting to destroy her professional reputation. And Scoppetta was physically acting as the mailman to avoid postal tracking.
I want you, the listener, to really put yourself in that woman's shoes for a second. Imagine you realize you are being stalked. The natural, ingrained human response is to call the police. You go to the Carabinieri station. But in Pavia, the man commanding the station, the man running the investigative unit, the man taking your report, is the man stalking you.
Right.
You are completely trapped in a room where the predator is wearing the uniform of the protector. The psychological violence of that is unimaginable.
It is the ultimate inversion of the social contract. And just as you process that level of betrayal, the investigation escalates again. The Clean 3 closures drop, pulling in 8 more suspects. This includes prominent local businessmen like Alberto Regini, the former president of the National Association of Private Construction Contractors in Pavia. And Clean 3 reveals that the extortion and the stalking were really just the appetizers.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Clean 3 focuses heavily on Brigadier Daniele Ziri, that labor inspector we mentioned. Ziri was apparently running his own fiefdom, forcing builders to pay him off or face ruinous site closures. But he wasn't just turning a blind eye.
No, not at all.
The files accuse these officers of aggressively sabotaging the justice system from the inside. We are talking about forging payment receipts so their friends appeared to have paid state fines that they never actually paid. We are talking about physically destroying case files. And most importantly, they are accused of altering the content of police wiretaps.
We need to pause and dissect this because altering wiretaps is the nuclear option of corruption.
It really is.
It destroys the foundational bedrock of modern policing. When a jury or a judge hears a wiretap, they consider it the gold standard of objective truth. It is the suspect's own voice.
Right. If I hear a guy say, "I paid the bribe," it's game over. So how do they alter it? They aren't in a Hollywood studio splicing audio tape together to make a fake sentence, are they?
Usually the vulnerability isn't in the audio file itself. It's in the transcription process, the brogliaccio.
The brogliaccio.
Yeah, the summary transcript. When a wiretap is active, hundreds of hours of mundane audio are recorded. A police officer sits in a room with headphones and writes a summary transcript of the relevant parts. Prosecutors and judges rarely have the time to listen to the raw audio. They read the brogliaccio.
Oh, man.
So if the audio says, "I dropped off the envelope for the mayor," the corrupt officer transcribes it as, "I dropped off the blueprints for the architect." Or they simply hit stop on the recording software for a crucial 3-minute window, claiming a technical glitch, and hit record again when the incriminating talk is over.
That is terrifyingly simple. If you control the transcription pen, you control reality. And this is the bridge, the horrifying realization that connects this local graft to one of Italy's darkest national traumas. Because if Pappalardo, Scoppetta, and their network were willing to alter wiretaps and destroy evidence to save a local builder from a labor fine, what did they do when they were investigating a murder?
Exactly. Every single case file these men touched in their careers is now radioactive. And that brings us to the Garlasco ghost. August 2007.
Right.
Chiara Poggi, a young woman, is brutally murdered in her family home in the quiet town of Garlasco, right in the heart of this same Pavia province. It becomes an absolute media circus. The entire country is obsessed with it.
For years, the sole focus of the justice system was her boyfriend, Alberto Stasi, who was eventually convicted. But the clean investigations have forced everyone to look back because the overlap in personnel is not a coincidence. It is a direct, staggering line. Do you remember Maurizio Pappalardo?
The commander.
The commander who stalked his ex and said, "We are the power." The files show that in 2007, Pappalardo was the head of the information unit for the Pavia Carabinieri.
Yes. During the peak of the media frenzy surrounding the Chiara Poggi murder, Pappalardo was the officer directly responsible for managing the flow of information from the active investigation to the National Press Corps. He was the gatekeeper of the narrative.
Having a deeply correct officer in charge of your murder investigations PR is like having an arsonist run the fire department's press briefings. But it gets worse. Jump forward a decade to 2017. The defense for Alberto Stasi pushes hard for a review, and the investigation temporarily pivots to a new suspect.
Right, a young man named Andrea Sempio.
Yeah, a friend of Chiara's brother. The police need to bug Sempio's car. Who is the officer they physically send to install the covert listening device?
Antonio Scoppetta, the courier, the man who used Pizzini and took a discounted villa. He plants the bug.
The guy currently sitting in San Vittore prison planted the microphone in a murder suspect's car. And the timeline of what that microphone recorded in February 2017 is one of the most inexplicable sequences of events I've ever encountered. Let's walk through this day by day.
Please. The timeline is the mechanism of the alleged cover-up.
Okay, February 5, 2017. Andrea Sempio is secretly under investigation. He doesn't know the bug is in his car, but the bug catches him receiving a phone call. It's an unidentified man on the other end. Now, this mystery man isn't calling from his home phone. He's using a phone belonging to a sex worker at a local nightclub.
Right.
And who runs this nightclub? Francesco Marchetto, the former Carabinieri commander of Garlasco.
A former commander running a club, and his phone is used to call a murder suspect. And what is the dialogue?
Sempio answers, and his tone is incredibly deferential, almost subservient. He doesn't ask who it is. He just says, completely unprompted, "Qualcosina si sta muovendo." Things are moving a little. And the mystery man simply replies, "Good," and hangs up.
Sempio is providing a status update to a shadow figure using operational security. A burner phone, essentially.
Right. Now, fast forward 4 days to February 9. The wiretaps capture something impossible. Someone secretly provides Andrea Sempio with the highly confidential, sealed investigation files against him. He is literally handed the prosecution's playbook.
And the very next morning, February 10, he is called in for his official interrogation.
And he walks into that room bulletproof. The investigators throw highly specific questions at him, like, why did your phone records show 3 calls to the Poggi house in the days leading up to the murder? And Sempio doesn't sweat. He doesn't stumble. He has perfectly rehearsed, airtight answers ready for every single trap because he read the traps the night before.
The implication is glaring. Francesco Marchetto, the former commander whose club the mystery call originated from, gave a public interview recently. And he didn't mince words.
What did he say?
He explicitly suggested that the identity of that mystery caller on February 5 is tied directly to the individuals arrested in the Clean 2 investigation.
Wait, are the sources suggesting that the very police unit investigating Sempio was the one feeding him the answers to beat the interrogation?
This raises an important question, yeah. The former commander is publicly pointing the finger at the current corrupt Carabinieri apparatus, essentially saying the cops protecting the builders were the same cops protecting Andrea Sempio.
But I have to ask, why? Why would a highly organized network of corrupt state officials stick their necks out to sabotage a massive national murder investigation for a random young guy like Andrea Sempio? What is his value to this system?
To answer that, investigators had to dig into Andrea Sempio's digital footprint, and they found something bizarre on, of all places, an internet seduction forum.
A seduction forum? Wow.
Yeah, Sempio is apparently an active user on these forums where men exchange tactics for picking up women. In one post, he went on a long, boasting tirade about his life. He claimed he didn't need to worry about money because he lives with his super-rich uncle. He described this uncle as one of the most powerful agricultural barons in northern Italy, a man who owned a sprawling villa with a pool and his own private helicopter.
Now, if you read that, your first instinct is, this is a kid lying on the internet to sound like a billionaire playboy. But investigative journalists took that description and overlaid it onto the map of Pavia, and it matched a very real, very terrifyingly powerful figure, Francesco Sempio.
Francesco Sempio is not just a wealthy farmer. He is the head of the Eurocom and Curtoriso groups. We are talking about a multinational rice empire. The Lombardy region produces a massive percentage of Europe's rice. This is an industry that commands 2 billion euros in annual revenue.
A 2 billion euro agricultural monopoly. Now, the exact familial relationship between young Andrea Sempio and billionaire Francesco Sempio is, it's pretty murky in the files. Some say distant relatives, some say it's just a shared last name in a small town.
Right, it's not totally clear.
But even the invocation of that name introduces the sheer gravity of extreme wealth into this story. It reminds us that Pavia isn't just sleepy brick buildings. It is a hub of unimaginable corporate agricultural money, and where there are billions of euros, there is the power to buy silence.
Which is the perfect segue to the highest tier of the Sistema, because billionaires and corrupt street cops are not enough to sustain a multi-decade criminal enterprise.
Right, anymore.
A corrupt cop can forge a wiretap, but eventually, a prosecutor has to look at the file and sign the order to close the case. If the prosecutor's clean, the whole system crashes, the cop goes to jail. To make a system truly bulletproof, you have to compromise the judiciary.
You need someone wearing a judge's robe on your payroll.
Yeah.
Enter Mario Venditti. Venditti was a high-ranking prosecutor in Pavia, and crucially, he was the exact prosecutor who, in 2017, took the Andrea Sempio murder investigation, the one where Sempio beat the interrogation after getting the leaked files and incredibly rapidly archived it.
Yes.
Shut the door on the case. Where is Mario Venditti right now?
The files state that Mario Venditti is currently under active investigation by prosecutors in Brescia. Brescia is the jurisdiction legally mandated to investigate crimes committed by magistrates operating in Pavia.
Okay.
He is being investigated for corruption in judicial acts, specifically regarding his handling of the Garlasco murder case, as well as for peculato.
And the detail that genuinely sounds like a dark comedy. While he is under investigation for corruption in a murder case, what is his current job? He is the director of the Casino dei Campioni.
Oh, that's wild.
An Italian anti-mafia prosecutor is running a massive gambling casino in a tiny Italian tax haven enclave inside Switzerland. It defies belief.
It is surreal, but he is not an isolated anomaly. The investigation also names Pietro Paolo Mazza, another former prosecutor from Pavia, who later moved to Milan. Mazza recently had his home and office raided by the financial police.
And what was the suspected bribe? A heavily discounted luxury car. I'm noticing a structural pattern here in the Pavia system. Scoppetta the cop gets a discounted villa. Mazza the prosecutor gets a discounted car. It's an economy of massive depreciations.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
But who gave Mazza the car? The files point to a company called Esitel. And this, listener, is the most terrifying mechanism of all. What exactly is Esitel?
Esitel is a private telecommunications company run by the Dorina brothers. Their core business model was holding the exclusive, contracted monopoly to provide all technical surveillance infrastructure for the Pavia prosecutor's office.
Wait, all of it?
Yes. They provided the secure servers, the software, the physical listening bugs, and the unmarked surveillance cars.
Wait, I need to make sure I am understanding the mechanics of this correctly. In Italy, the police don't just own their own wiretap servers in the basement of the precinct.
No, the technological demands are too high and evolve too quickly. The Ministry of Justice outsources the physical infrastructure of wiretapping to private, highly vetted tech companies. The police just log into the system the private company builds.
So let me synthesize this. The prosecution is alleging that the private company holding the keys to the secret servers, the company physically recording every confidential mafia and corruption wiretap in the province, is bribing the prosecutor who authorizes those wiretaps.
That is the exact allegation. It is a terrifying, closed-loop system.
It's like hiring a highly skilled bank robber to install the security cameras inside your vault and then giving him the only master key to the server room so he can edit the footage before you see it.
Exactly.
And it gets worse, because Esitel was the exact company contracted to handle the 2017 wiretaps of Andrea Sempio. The same bug planted by the corrupt cop Scoppetta was transmitting audio to servers owned by Esitel.
And Acetel had a known, incredibly shady track record. Francesco Greco, the highly respected top prosecutor in Milan, had previously kicked Acetel out of his jurisdiction entirely.
Really? Why?
Because his technicians caught Acetel illegally routing highly sensitive, classified wiretap data streams to off-site unauthorized external servers. They were siphoning state secrets.
So Milan realizes they are a massive security threat and expels them. But Pavia welcomes them with open arms and hands them a monopoly over the region's secrets. Think about the implications of this ecosystem.
It's staggering.
The private company running the servers is allegedly bribing the judges. The cops planting the bugs are allegedly extorting the citizens and altering the transcripts. And the politicians are using utility companies to fund campaigns. There is no clean link in the chain. The entire mechanism of truth-finding is completely structurally compromised from top to bottom.
Which means we have to view any official document, any closed case file, any trial transcript that originated in Pavia during this era as potentially toxic. It forces us to look at the very soil of this region. You don't build an ecosystem that's resilient overnight.
No, definitely not.
This is the deep rot. And the files explicitly state, we have to look at the cultural history of Pavia to understand how it grew.
The investigative files literally refer to the Pavia region as a Bermuda Triangle of Freemasonry. They cite official confirmations from the Grand Orient of Italy that there are at least 10 active, recognized Masonic lodges operating in the background of this relatively small, quiet province.
Right.
Now, I want to be clear, being a Freemason is not illegal. But in the context of systemic corruption, how does a lodge function as a mechanism for this rot?
It functions as a shadow network that bypasses democratic and bureaucratic oversight. If you are a corrupt builder, you don't walk into a prosecutor's office and hand him a bag of cash. That's how you get arrested.
Sure.
But if the builder, the prosecutor, the head of the tax police, and the health inspector all wear the same apron and swear blood oaths of loyalty to each other in a windowless room on a Tuesday night, the conspiracy happens seamlessly outside the office. The lodge provides the secure, unmonitored architecture for the elite to coordinate.
And to illustrate how terrifyingly efficient this occult coordination can be when it wants to destroy someone, the files detail the tragedy of Fabio Cachet.
Yes. Fabio Cachet was a highly successful, legitimate rice entrepreneur. He built a company called Europea Spa, which grew to a valuation of around 60 million euros.
Wow, 60 million.
But she was an outsider. He wasn't in the lodges. He wasn't part of the Sistema. So the system decided to cannibalize his wealth. Over a decade, Cachet was hit with an avalanche of over 20 completely fabricated criminal charges.
And they didn't just accuse him of dodging taxes, they went for the throat. The system accused a rice farmer of international cocaine trafficking and mafia association.
It's brutal.
The strategy was clear. Throw the heaviest, most legally suffocating books at him to freeze his assets, destroy his credit lines, and tie him up in court for the rest of his life. But how did the legal avalanche actually start?
It started with the weaponization of the administrative state. The initial domino was a series of highly aggressive, targeted health and customs inspections on his rice silos. And who oversaw those health inspections? A man named Carlo Chiriaco, the head of the local health authority in Pavia.
Let me guess, Carlo Chiriaco wasn't just a passionate advocate for food safety.
No. Carlo Chiriaco was later arrested and definitively convicted of external participation in mafia association during a massive anti-Drangheta sweep. He was the mafia's man inside the health department. So you have a mafia-linked bureaucrat initiating the destruction of a clean competitor.
So Attaché fights for years. He is eventually cleared of all these insane charges, but the process is the punishment. By the time the courts declare him innocent, his credit is gone, his reputation is in ashes, and his business is ruined. He is forced into bankruptcy over a trivial, lingering debt.
Yeah.
And here is where the vultures land. Who swoops into the bankruptcy auction to buy his 60 million euro company for absolute pennies on the dollar? A newly formed, specialized entity called Nextris. And who owns Nextris?
Let me guess.
The Eurocon Group. The empire of the billionaire Sempio family.
It is a flawless, terrifying demonstration of how the modern mafia operates. They don't shoot you in the street. They use a corrupt health inspector to shut down your factory, a corrupt prosecutor to freeze your bank accounts with fake drug charges, and a bankruptcy judge to hand your life's work over to the favored elites for a fraction of its value.
The bureaucracy is the weapon.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? The ultimate question is this new? Is the Sistema Pavia a recent phenomenon born in the 2020s? The files look back to the 1990s and definitively say no. The ghosts of the past are woven into the very fabric of this region. Let's talk about 1994 and the Tangentopoli scandal.
Tangentopoli, or Bribesville, was the massive nationwide corruption investigation led by the Manipulite, the Clean Hands team, in Milan. It essentially wiped out the entire political establishment of Italy's First Republic in the early 90s.
Right.
The entire country was mesmerized as thousands of politicians and businessmen were arrested for a systemic, institutionalized culture of kickbacks on public works.
And right in the middle of that national earthquake in 1994, who gets arrested for allegedly bribing the financial police with hundreds of millions of lire to avoid scrutiny over international aid contracts? Francesco Sempio, the rice billionaire.
What was that name again?
Exactly. The system of paying off law enforcement to protect the agricultural monopolies in Pavia isn't a new strategy. It's a generational tradition. Tangentopoli didn't eradicate the corruption in Pavia. It just taught the survivors how to hide it better, how to use private servers and encrypted apps instead of passing briefcases of cash.
And that leads us to the darkest historical precedent in the files, a detail from 1995 that connects the quiet town of Garlasco to an international geopolitical nightmare. We have to introduce the listeners to Operation Gladio and Ilaria Alpi.
This is where the story expands from local graft to deep state espionage. In 1994, an incredibly brave Italian journalist named Ilaria Alpi and her cameraman Miran Hrvatin were assassinated in Mogadishu, Somalia.
Yeah, a real tragedy.
She was on the verge of exposing a massive illegal weapons and toxic waste smuggling ring. The theory is that Italian state intelligence, operating in conjunction with the mafia, was shipping European toxic waste to Somalia and trading it to warlords in exchange for weapons. Her execution is an unhealed national trauma in Italy.
And a year later, in 1995, Italian police execute a search warrant. They aren't in Rome or Milan. They are in the tiny, supposedly sleepy town of Garlasco. They raid the home of a man named Giorgio Camario.
Who was he?
Camario was not a local farmer. He was a known intelligence asset, an operative connected to the Gladio network. Gladio was a clandestine CIA and NATO-backed stay-behind paramilitary network designed to fight a guerrilla war in the event of a Soviet invasion of Europe.
Right.
But during the Cold War, elements of Gladio became deeply entangled with extreme right-wing terrorism and the mafia.
Camario was an engineer, but he didn't design bridges. He designed specialized deep-sea torpedoes. These torpedoes were designed to be packed full of highly radioactive and toxic waste and shot deep into the ocean floor.
It's unbelievable.
It was the ultimate untraceable waste disposal system for the mafia and corrupt industrial giants. A toxic waste torpedo designer for the deep state, living quietly in Garlasco. And what did the police find when they opened his safe?
They found the official, original death certificate of their murdered journalist, Ilaria Alpi, sitting in a safe in Garlasco.
I need to take a breath because synthesizing all of this is just overwhelming. What the investigative files are suggesting is that towns like Garlasco, San Genesio, and Pavia are not just quaint agricultural hubs with a few bad apples in the mayor's office.
No, not at all.
The sources suggest that for decades, this specific region has operated as a logistical, operational node for deep state secrets, dark money, and unholy alliances between corrupt state actors, intelligence assets, Masonic lodges, and organized crime. The murder of Chiara Poggi, the extortion of local builders, the rigged elementary school contracts, they are all just different toxic flowers growing out of the exact same poison soil.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a sobering realization. We began this entire journey looking at a minor local politician who allegedly funneled 5,500 euros through a fake corporate video invoice.
Right.
That seemed like petty theft. But that tiny thread pulled us into a labyrinth of forged police wiretaps, untouchable Carabinieri commanders, billionaires buying up bankrupted rivals,
Right.
and the literal ghosts of assassinated journalists and Cold War spies.
It completely reframes how we must view civic administration. The health of a democracy doesn't just rely on the grand speeches made by the prime minister in Rome. It relies entirely on the boring, granular integrity of local administrative systems.
Exactly.
When the local labor inspector who checks the scaffolding is taking a bribe from the same builder paying off the mayor, and the private tech contractor running the wiretap servers is bribing a magistrate, and the police commander is altering the transcripts to protect them all, the entire concept of objective truth and justice collapses. There's no foundation left. It's a house of cards built on quicksand.
And that leads directly to a final, deeply provocative thought that I want to leave you with today.
Okay, what is it?
We live in an era where we consume a massive amount of true crime media. We read exhaustive books, we listen to deep dives, we pore over official court transcripts, and we analyze police interrogation videos to understand what really happened in famous, highly publicized cases like the Garlasco murder. We treat those documents as historical facts.
Right. We assume the paper trail is real.
Exactly. But if a system this complex, a system proven to be capable of physically altering audio wiretaps, intentionally destroying evidence files, and actively shielding murder suspects using the full weight of the state's investigative apparatus, if a system like that can operate in a quiet Italian province completely undetected for decades, we have to ask a terrifying existential question.
I think I know where you're going with this.
How much of our accepted true crime history, not just in Italy but worldwide, is actually just a meticulously crafted fiction? It might just be the byproduct of hidden systemic administrative corruption. If the people writing the official police reports, the people we rely on to record history, are the actual criminals pulling the strings, how do we ever know what really happened?
If the X-ray machine is fundamentally rigged, you can never trust the picture of the broken bone. It makes you question every documentary you've ever watched. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly intense, labyrinthine deep dive. Keep questioning the surface narratives, keep looking beneath the quiet waters of your own local governments, and we will see you next time.